doing our Thursday edition of the masterclass today, and today's going to be on PA basics or gear. We're going to focus on the PA system as far as gear goes. I'm sure we're going to have a lot more of these lots of different type of gear that we can dive into today. We're just going to talk about one of the things that oftentimes can kind of mystify a lot of musicians or confuse a lot of musicians when it comes to what they need to do to just get a basic understanding and operational skills for running a PA system. So we're going to do that. We're doing it a little bit different than some of the master classes. We're doing it from School of Rock with our performance room here. We have a really awesome facility that cannot wait until we're allowed to have people come back into and use all the cool stuff we have in this space. So we're going to use our PA system here today so that you guys can get a real good look at this. So I'm going to do some screen sharing like I've done in previous broadcasts for some of the content we're sharing in the master classes. We're also going to do some really, hopefully, good camera work to show you guys a real close-up view of all the stuff we have here to kind of go along with the presentation. So we're going to get started. I'm going to screen share the presentation to start with you guys and just kind of show you some of the stuff that is coming up. So let's take a look at that. All right. Now, you've seen this on your side? Our gear masterclass today on PA basics. What is a PA? PA, it's a really good question. Most people think PA and they just assume speakers, or they assume it's a mixer. A PA is really all of those things combined. PA stands for Public Announcement System, or Public Address System. It goes back to the early days when microphones and speakers first became a part of the technology you can use to reinforce sound to literally address the public. Since then, that term has just kind of been broadly used for anything that is used to amplify sound to a crowd. So PA system, public address system, that's essentially what PA is. That can be confusing for people because there's many different ways to amplify sound from here. Today, what we're going to talk about are just some of the basics that we use when we're talking about playing as a band on your performances. There are a lot of different components of a PA system. You've got a mixer, you've got speakers. Oftentimes, you have monitors. We'll talk about what that means, what those are. Microphones, and then you've also got your instruments could be considered part of your PA system, depending on what we're talking about. We'll go over that in more specifics. But you've also got kind of any electronic controls that you might add into the PA system to go along with your mixer. A mixer is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's mixing all of the components that are going through, but we also oftentimes use some additional equipment to go along with the mixer to add effects or manipulations to the sound that we want. So a mixer, speakers, monitors, microphones, cables, and then some other various electronic components even in the most basic setup. We'll talk about all of those things. You see some of the pictures here. This is a mixer at the top left-hand corner, obviously a speaker. We got monitors, microphone, electronic components. Let's start with mixing boards, mixing consoles. A mixing console is essentially made to let us take a bunch of different things that we want to come out through the speakers and to mix them together literally. So I'm going to swap back to our camera for a second here. We're going to take a look at what we have for a mixing console here in our performance mix. We've got our speakers set up, but we have our mixing console off to the side here. And essentially what this allows us to do is plug in microphones, keyboards, guitars, anything we want to run through the speakers, and then allows us to blend them. When we use a mixing console, it typically has multiple channels so that we can run as many of each thing as we need. Maybe a couple of microphones, a couple of keyboards, an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar. If you see a really big console, you're going to have the ability to mix an entire drum set that maybe has a microphone on each drum. So it's going to be really, really important that you have exactly what you need for any given scenario. In this case, at our performance room here at School of Rock, we have a mixing console that is basically 10 channels. We're going to focus on what we need to reinforce sound for our students when they're doing a performance in the room.
So 10 channels should be about what we need because we're not going to run too much through the mixing console. With the mixing console, if we're running a microphone from the stage to the console, we have these cables we can use. And typically when we're running a microphone for vocals or anything else, we use what's called an XLR cable. The XLR stands for ground, which is X, left and right, okay? These three pins inside of the cable, the ground, the left and the right, are what plugs into this 3-prong input on the top and allows us to send a really nice clean signal to the mixing console. Once we've done that, and it's running through a channel strip, which is just this one line of knobs going down channel 1, we have the ability to control the volume of that microphone, as well as whether it's coming out the left speaker, the right speaker, or right dead center, we call that pan. And then we have an effects knob, a monitor knob, and then our EQ, high, mid, and low. All of these things allow us to manipulate the microphone for our vocalist and get the best sound possible. We also have a gain button, which allows us to basically give a nice amount of electronic signal boost to the microphone before we control the volume. Sometimes if we have a quieter singer, somebody whose voice isn't super powerful, we can boost the gain up for them a little bit. It's almost like kind of amplifying the signal of their mic for them so they don't have to necessarily push too hard with their vocal cords. A compressor is also something we can use to help with that. Getting into more specifics on those would be a little bit more of an in-depth overview, a masterclass on EQ and mixing. So we won't talk too much about that, but essentially just so you can understand what some of the knobs are that you're seeing here, that's what we use those for. One of the other things that's on there is this little button. It's probably really hard to see because it's tiny, but it says HPF, that's a high pass filter. That allows us to push in that button, and what it does is it cuts out all the low frequencies that would be really rumbly or pop when a vocalist was singing that typically you don't want. If you've ever used a microphone before, you might have noticed if you walk up to it, it can get real boomy real fast when you're speaking. You want to make sure that you're avoiding that anytime you're using a microphone for vocals. So this little button allows us a real quick option to just trim those frequencies that singers don't need completely out of there without having to worry about any extra control on the EQ. Once we've got the basic understanding of how each channel works and can be manipulated, what we have to talk about there is what we're going to be plugging into the mixer. So let's talk about that. On stage here, we've got a couple of keyboards set up right now. We've got a couple of microphones set up right now. We've got our beautiful drum set, and we've got a couple of amplifiers. We've got a couple of guitar amplifiers over there, another guitar amplifier, and a bass amplifier over here. For today's purposes on PA Basics, we are not going to talk about amplifiers, miking up guitar amplifiers, or miking up bass amplifiers. We're not going to talk about miking up drums. Those are their own unique, special kind of subjects that we'll probably will do future classes on. They're great things to know. We're going to keep it real basic today. We're in our performance room at School of Rock, and this room is essentially the perfect size and the perfect setup for us to just worry about reinforcing a couple of things sound-wise that we need. And those are mainly going to be keyboards and vocals. And the reason for that is that vocals, obviously, if somebody's singing, even with a powerful voice, at a certain point, drums all by themselves, or guitars all by themselves, they're going to drown out our vocals. Our vocals need something that they can sing into, talk into, connect with the crowd with, and make sure that they're being heard. So these are one of the main things we need to come through the PA system. Keyboards are another thing that we need to come through the PA system. We do find keyboard amps in the real musician gigging world, but these days technology has brought us to a place where, fortunately, most keyboard players can go directly into the PA system and can absolutely just find their way back, can find their way directly into the PA system and be able to be heard while also hearing themselves. Amplifiers for keyboard players are something that used to be used quite a bit. I don't think you see it quite as often anymore. It's a lot more convenient to just run a standard instrument cable from the output of your keyboard into one of the inputs on the mixing console and then just be able to turn it up, okay? So the main things we're running through the PA system today we're going to talk about are vocal mics, and keyboards. Now, obviously, like I said, we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the other things that can be run through a PA system. But for right now, we're just going to talk about how a mixing console can help us in this particular setup. I want to go back to the slide presentation for 1 second so that I can show you guys some of the things that are going to be also related to what we're talking about here. So let's go ahead and dive back into that really quickly. We'll pick up where we left off from the mixing console. And there we go. Amplifiers. Now, this particular slide is showing you a picture of a Fender amplifier like we have on stage. And it's also showing you the peak lights on the actual mixing console that we have in here. The term amplifier, more often than not, people think of it as what you see on the stage back there that we showed just a minute ago. But in this sense, with a PA system, we're going to talk about what an amplifier means with a PA system. Okay, I'm going to stop this again so you guys can see me, and I want to come over here and look at the back of these speakers. Before we start talking about the speakers themselves, let's look at the back of the speaker for a second and just talk about what modern technology has done for musicians. We have got a volume knob on the back of the speaker itself to control how loud this speaker will be. It used to be that you would have this entire rack of gear. Now, if you pan over to that mixer really quick, sitting all by itself, that we were just at, that mixer is now sitting on top of a nice workstation. It's all by itself. It's plugged in, it's got some things run into it, but that's it. What we used to see was a mixer like that, and instead of it sitting there by itself, we used to see the mixer on top of a unit that held amplifiers, and it held all this other electronic gear, and it was all wired together, and it all had to process the amplification of sound before it even came to the speakers. These days, 99% of the time, most musicians are using this speaker setup. With whatever brand of speaker you're using, they're using it to basically cut that part of the process out, which is really nice. You don't have to have a whole rack of gear anymore. Everything is now enclosed inside of a speaker. Basically, amplifiers have been shrunk down to where they're still powerful and still great, but they can fit inside the actual speaker cabinet too. This speaker is actually a traditional speaker on the front, just like you have it on your stereo system at home, just bigger. This one's 15 inches. You've got a nice speaker cone inside, you've got a horn in the top. That's going to be sending the sound out. But the speaker enclosure itself also has that amplifier built into the vacuum. Okay? That's why you're seeing a fan. We have a fan that's actually running the cooling of that. And then this volume knob. So this speaker right here, all by itself, is capable of handling, even if we want to plug a vocal mic into it directly, just go ahead and do it that way. Now, why don't we do it that way? Why do we use a mixer? Because typically in a band situation, we're going to have 1 or 2 vocalists, we might have 1 or 2 keyboard players, and then other situations which may be outside, louder, bigger venues, things like that, we're going to have lots of extra instrumentation that might need to be run through it. The speaker itself only has this one input. So we use the input to run the signal from the mixing console with all of our instruments mixed together the way we want to this one input on the back of the speaker. It goes into the amplifier that's built into the back of the speaker, it gets amplified, and then it gets sent out through the speaker in the front where we're good to go. It's really nice, it's really easy, it's a lot less complicated than it used to be. I know I probably don't look that old, but to be honest with you, the first PA system I ever bought, the speakers were twice this size. They came up to about here on me. They didn't carry them around. They had no amplifiers built inside. They were 3 times as heavy. And honestly, they didn't sound as good. These days, the amount of technology being put into gear for musicians is really exciting and incredible, and it makes things so much easier. Let's talk about another part of the slide presentation. It's coming up next. I'm not going to come back to it just yet. The slide, I kind of skipped ahead to it right before we started doing this part of the presentation. You might have seen the slide. We'll get to it in a second. It says FOH, front of house. If we zoom out a little bit, we'll see that not only do we have this speaker right here, on the other side of our stage, we have the other speaker. We have a left and a right. This is our front of house. Front of house literally means the speakers as part of your PA system that go to the crowd, the front of the house. This is what your crowd is when we hear. If we have a whole bunch of people sitting over there getting ready to watch one of our awesome performances up here at School of Rock, they are the house. These speakers are feeding the front of the house. They're basically going to be what our audience hears. The reason it's important to understand that with a PA system is because if you're going to run sound through your band, or even if you have a sound man that's going to do it for you, you refer to the mix of sound coming out of these speakers to your audience as front of house. You have a separate mix for other speakers that we're going to talk about in a second, but I want to make sure we do a little bit of kind of a cumulative flow of mixing console to the front of house speakers and into all the other components. So let's go back to the slideshow for a second. I'm going to share my screen again, and we are going to go back to that slide I was talking about, front of house. If you take a look at this slide right here, you'll notice we've got a picture of some musicians in a relatively similar setup. They've obviously got some very fancy lights. But you'll see that there's a speaker to either side, and all of the musicians are kind of behind those speakers. The reason that's important is because you basically have the musicians behind the main mix, and that helps us avoid what's called feedback. If we have any microphones or any other instrumentation, and the speakers are behind us, what ends up happening is the sound from the original source, the vocals, anything else goes into the microphone, comes out through the speaker, and then it basically gets pushed back out into the microphones again, and it creates a loop, which is why we get those feedback sounds. Literally, you might have heard it referred to as loop feedback. We don't want that. So a big part of the reason why we call it front of house is you always want to make sure that your PA system is set up so that the speakers that are feeding the audience are truly in front of the band. They're for the audience. They're not for the band. It's not for the band to hear themselves. That's really important. The reason we have that whole front of house differentiation is to make sure people understand if you're new to setting up a PA system, you know how to do that. There we go. Okay. Oh, there we go. We skipped ahead. Okay. Let's talk about monitor speakers. Before I cut back to camera, you'll notice some of these pictures right here. We've got a musician leaning over the pedal board, and we've got these speakers on the floor facing up at them. We've also got a nice little picture here of one of our School of Rock performances where our students have got their feet up on the floor monitors, up on the wedges, kind of like a little footstool. You see performers do that all the time. I wouldn't recommend it unless they're your speakers. You might upset the front of house engineer, the sound man or the audio engineer, or whoever typically owns that gear. They don't typically love feet on it. But if they're yours, you're more welcome to do what you want. We also have our third picture in this slide of a bass player, and if you notice, coming up behind him, there are some in-ear monitors. He's got basically earbuds. We call them in-ear monitors, and that's also something that can be used in place of the monitor speakers on the ground. But I'm going to stop sharing the slide for a second so that I can show you guys a typical setup for monitors in our setup. Okay, so we talked about front of house. We have the speakers aiming out to the audience. I said we don't want for our performers to have these main speakers up top be behind them because it causes feedback. But if that's the case, they can't hear themselves. This is one of the biggest parts of performing music that typically creates issues when it comes to a band and being able to play songs the way that they want to. Any musician will tell you that the most fun you can have playing music is when you're playing with other people and you can hear and feel your part along with everyone else nice and clearly. But the truth is, getting that to happen in a way that is effective for the crowd and effective for the band is the real secret and the real magic to mixing sound. Typically, that's why you'll see in larger, more complicated setups the use of a sound man, sometimes multiple sound men. With monitors, we have these speakers on the floor. The speaker on the floor right here is the same speaker as what we have up on the stand, but it's slightly smaller. It's the same version. It's powered. The amplifier is built in. It's all set to go. You can run a cable right into it. And then this one is slightly smaller. It's a 12-inch, but it's still powered. Still has plenty of room to send a signal coming back up to the stage. If we walk around onto the stage, if I'm a vocalist and I'm singing, I'm going to basically be up here, hopefully singing into the vocal mic. And then the only way for me to hear myself, because these speakers are pointed forward from front of house, is down here on the ground with this monitor. This monitor is going to help me actually hear my vocal. And it might seem like with a front of house speaker this close to you, well, hey, I should be able to hear myself no problem. The truth is, you won't. You won't hear the clarity you're going to need in order to be a vocalist. In order to hear yourself the way you're going to want to hear yourself to perform. When you hear something coming out of it, yeah, you'll hear something. But the monitor gives you a much better ability to hear yourself. Now, how come this doesn't cause feedback? Well, the reason this doesn't cause feedback is because monitors are made to sit at an angle on the floor that comes back at you where the sound does not bleed into the microphones, because the sound's coming at you and the microphone is also coming at you. If the sound's coming from behind, that's going to go into the mic. Microphones are made so that they don't pick up anything other than this kind of little imaginary cardioid pattern right in front of you. But the monitor is not going to affect that. The other thing about having a speaker dedicated and aimed directly at you from the floor is that you have the ability to put volume up to the point where you need to hear yourself, but it typically doesn't have to be as loud coming from your monitor as it is going to be from the front of house. If we've got 50 people out there watching a performance, we're going to need to make sure that mix going to them sounds the best it can for them. In order to do that, we really want to have the ability to completely separate the mix in a way where, as a vocalist, I can say, yeah, that's good for me, I can hear myself perfectly. My vocal's probably not going to be coming out as loud through the monitor as it is through the front of the house. And that's good, that's fine. We don't have to worry about that. But there's a couple of things, including the angle and the spacing, and the fact that we don't have to turn it up as loud, that are going to help us prevent feedback. Now, feedback still happens. You have to make sure you understand the deeper concepts of running sound with volume and with gain and with EQ, but those are things we'll probably cover in a more in-depth tutorial on specifically running EQ or maybe running monitor mixes. Now, we go back to the mixing console for 1 second. We will talk about one of the knobs that I was trying to point out to you guys, which was the monitor knob. On each channel, you'll see that there's a little blue button that says MON, monitor. Every single channel on here has one of those. What that means is that when we run a cable from the output of the board to a monitor, if we want to hear our vocalist that's in channel 1 in the monitor, we can turn it up here and it doesn't affect our front of house. Only our master volume for that channel is going to affect the front of house. So we may have the front of house turned up quite a bit, and then that vocalist wants a little bit of their monitor. We turn their monitor up a little bit, and what they're getting is their vocal through the speaker that was on the floor. Same thing with our keyboard players. Maybe our keyboard player has another speaker on this side, and we want to turn them up. We might turn them up a little bit more. The other thing is we have multiple vocalists with multiple monitors. Vocalist 1, maybe they're a little deaf. We turn them up a little bit more so they can hear themselves. Maybe vocalist 2 isn't quite as deaf. We don't have to give them as much. They're fine, they can hear themselves. So our monitor buttons allow us to give that complete separate mix to our performers on the stage so that they have the ability to do that. If you're running sound for yourself, that's a really important thing to understand so you can make sure you can do that. Let's go back to the slide presentation for just a second. All right. I know that we didn't cover in-ear monitors. We'll talk about those. That's another thing that's going to be kind of its own separate, unique thing. But let's talk about microphones. Microphones we just had up on stage. I was telling you about the monitor. Microphones are one of those things that are the lifeline of a vocalist. A vocalist is never, ever going to be able to compete with drums, guitars, bass, and everything else that's happening on stage without something that helps them reinforce what they're able to produce with their own vocal cords. Your body, no matter how good and how strong your vocal cords are, is not going to be able to handle the capacity we would need to surpass the sound of the drum set. So microphones help us get that. Essentially, a microphone is just, if you were to take it apart, you find inside a tiny little metallic ribbon that was super thin. And what it does is it picks up the vibrations of your voice, because your voice actually moves air. And it sends it electronically through a cable into the mixer, and then sends that to the speakers. So the speakers pick that up through all the vibrations you're sending right into a microphone. And microphones are designed so that we can put them in various places, but kind of isolate how much vibration they pick up based on what kind of a microphone they are. The ones we have on stage are meant for vocals, so they have what we call a cardioid pattern. It's literally an imaginary shape in the air that looks almost just like a heart. And that's meant so that we can basically put it where the vocalist is standing and not have too much of the other surrounding things get picked up by the microphone. We don't want the guitar amps on the floor to get picked up by the microphone. We don't want too much of the drum set to get picked up by the microphone. We just want the vocalist's voice that's right in front of that microphone to be what we hear. Let's see. Signal processing. Signal processing is basically exactly what we went over on the mixing console earlier. You've got the ability to add effects to your vocal. You've got the ability to control the different types of EQ. You've got the ability to turn the volume up or down. All of that's considered signal processing. The signal processing is what we basically call our manipulation of anything running through the mixer. When we're running stuff through the mixer, we want to process that signal in whatever way we see fit. For vocalists, it might be pretty straightforward. We just want to make their voice louder. Maybe they have an amazing voice. For a keyboard player, maybe you want to be able to control how much low end or something else is coming through. For the guitar player, if they are for some reason coming through the PA system, maybe they're running indirect and maybe you mic'd up their guitar amp, you may want to have the ability to affect that in a certain way. The other thing that you can do is you can affect vocals with that HPF button I was talking about, so that you cut out the low frequencies, and that's just another part of the signal process. Some of the other parts of signal processing I said effects. We've got reverb, echo, delay, compression, and EQ. Reverb is essentially giving you kind of not necessarily a full echo, but it kind of gives a little bit of a reverb. I'm sorry, that's actually the term. It gives a little bit of a short echo sound. It's not quite an echo where you'll be able to hear the repetition of the sound, but it gives a little bit of what we call like ambiance to the sound coming through. So for vocals, it's more of a subtle echo. It just kind of smooths the vocals out. Echo is exactly what it sounds like. That's when you're going to get something that repeats and trails off. Delay is actually very similar to that in the sense that when we have delay, we have an echo that can be controlled in different increments of time. So that allows us to do all kinds of things that create overlap and create really cool effects. Compression is when we take anything running through their vocals, any kind of signal whatsoever, and we literally compress it. What that helps us do is it helps us kind of equalize and regulate the signal. It means that somebody who has the ability to sing but doesn't necessarily have the ability to be quieter or louder than they need to be, the compression will help that automatically happen. We take the signal, we squeeze it a little bit, and then anytime they get a little too soft, even though they shouldn't be, it brings it up. Anytime they get a little too loud, even though they shouldn't be, it brings it down. And it kind of keeps them a little more in the middle. EQ is just our simple, basic, standard control of high frequencies, mid frequencies, and low frequencies. Just like you have if you're trying to go in and adjust the EQ on your phone, you're listening to Spotify or anything else you listen to. EQ is the same thing, and there's a lot of reasons why we want to change the EQ for every signal coming into our mixer. But again, that's probably something we're talking about on specific master classes. Signal flow. Let's talk about signal flow for a second. We're going to go through this. I know you're looking at this. You're looking at this slide at the moment, and it's talking about all the different things that go through here.
Instead of making you stare at bullet points, what I want to do is literally walk you through signal flow. So I'm going to walk you through one thing to the next. So we're going to start with our microphone. When I say signal flow, what I'm talking about is exactly where the signal is going and where it's ending. So here's my microphone. If I'm singing into it or talking into it like this, what's happening, my voice is going inside, vibrating the little ribbon that's in there. It's being transferred into an electronic signal coming through this cable right here, which is, if we go all the way down the pathway, running through here, coming up and running into channel 1 on the mixer. That's where my microphone's going. So far my signal flow has been from microphone, cable into mixer, and now where does it go from there? Well, I have the volume control. If I turn it up, that's great. It's gonna give me whatever volume I need. But what does that mean? Well, it means it's giving you volume, but where's the next part of the signal flow? The signal flow is coming from here once you turn the volume up and getting routed to our main outputs of the board. The 2 speakers for front of house that we talked about earlier, left and right, have cables that are running out. You'll notice on these ones, it's a completely different side of the XLR cable. This side of the XLR cable is what we use when we're running an output. If you compare that with what we saw earlier, this is our input with our XLR there. This gets plugged in, runs in here. Signal flow came from the microphone going in. Now it's running through the mixer to the output, and it's coming out of this cable, and the 2 cables that are running out are getting plugged into the back of the speaker right here. So now we have the mixer sending that signal into our speaker to be projected to our audience. The signal flow starts with the microphone, runs through the cable, through the mixer, through the output cable going into the speaker, and then vibrates the speaker cone, which sends the sound out to the audience, and that is the end of the signal flow for our audience. It would be the same thing if we were running a keyboard. It would be keyboard into an instrument cable. The instrument cable would run into a channel on the mixer itself. That would run into the main output of the board, which would then be routed for the cable that goes into our PA speaker. Everything for signal flow must go sound source, mixing console, front of house speakers. That's our signal flow. It's really that simple. The time people typically get the most confused is when they start thinking about multiple items being sent to the mixer for our signal flow. Signal flow can get confusing when you start talking about not just 1 microphone, but 2 microphones. You start talking about 3 microphones and a keyboard and a guitar, or maybe anything else you can think of that we run through a mixing console. That's where it gets a little bit tricky, which is really what leads us to the last topic that we're going to jump back into on the slide presentation, which is sound. Why do we need a sound? Well, as you can probably guess, we've been going through PA basics, and we've been running through a smaller setup, which is a nice 10-channel board. But if we're doing anything more complicated than that, what we probably want is to have somebody dedicated to keeping track of the signal flow, keeping track of what we have in there, so that we can really have the best mix possible for the audience and for musicians. And you don't necessarily want to have your musicians be responsible for this because they've had enough to do. They're going to be thinking about the songs that they're playing. They're going to be thinking about their performance and their stagecraft of looking out at the audience and connecting with them. They're not going to want to have to all be responsible for their signal flow, their volume, their EQ control, all of that. You want a sound person to be able to do that for you. A lot of times, most bands would consider their sound engineer, their sound man, to be the 5th member of the band, or the, however many people there are in the band, they're also considered a band. They are doing something which is super important to the overall outcome of band's performance. And thank you again for joining us. I hope you guys had a great Thursday, and we'll see you next Tuesday. All right, take care.